And so we've been doing this for a while, but there's sometimes hiccups. And so just please bear with me. So Amy, if you could help me, are you seeing the slide deck? Okay. Can folks hear me okay? Maybe it looks like Amy can at least. I hope that the other y'all can hear me as well. So sometimes when I'm presenting, I struggle to see the chat, but I've just found it now. And so thank you for the feedback that you can hear and see us. So we are the title of our presentation is Building a Shared Understanding of Critical Disinformation. So, and now you all see agenda, a blank screen that says agenda. Okay, cool. So they always say, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. So that's what we're about to do here. So we're going to introduce you to the syllabus that we use to build our shared understanding. We will then talk about how the University of Minnesota Libraries, as a case study, as how we use this syllabus. And then we will tell you a bit about the syllabus examples, and then we'll come back to the UMN Libraries case study. But at the bottom of each slide, eventually, you will see where we are. We've nested these breadcrumbs here that are in the agenda, and so that can be fun too. But before we move on, I just wanted to give a shout out to our colleagues at the Minneapolis Community and Technical College, Alyssa Becknell and Rebecca March, who in February gave a talk here for Media Landscapes, Combating Media Nihilism and Intergenerational Discussion. We will talk a tiny bit about epistemologies today, but if you want to know more, you should totally go check out their talk in the resources that Matt shared. And absolutely revisit that presentation as well as all of the presentations. I think that these are could be a really great case study as well. Unlike the previous presenters, though, who were absolutely inspiring and made me and maybe Amy a bit nervous to follow up after them, our presentation is a little bit different. We didn't collect resources. We didn't do a study. What actually happened is that we found this syllabus and that was developed for others. And you might have heard of some other syllabus or syllabi that are similar to this, maybe like the Lemonade syllabus that accompanied the album Lemonade by Beyonce, Giselle Knowles Carter. So there's that. And we'll share that syllabus with you too. Also, there's a syllabus going around called the Purple Syllabus that is about Prince and time in Minnesota. And so sometimes you can find a syllabus like this to further your knowledge. We don't know what we don't know, and there's so much out there. And so if somebody has already created something that seems pretty good, it doesn't hurt to investigate that more. And so we used this syllabus that we're about to talk about as a form of peer professional development to do a deepish dive into disinformation to educate ourselves and to understand what our students and faculty and all of us are up against. And so I'm sorry, Amy, I just wanted Amy to introduce herself.
Yeah, I'm Amy Riggleman, and I'm a social sciences librarian here at the University of Minnesota Libraries, and I co-chair our systematic review service, and I am lucky enough to have co-facilitated this critical disinformation study syllabus with Wanda.
Okay, thanks, Amy. Again, my name is Wanda Marsalik. My pronouns are they, them. I'm an engineering liaison and data curation librarian here at the University of Minnesota. But before I might say that a lot, but before we dive into this or jump into this, we want to hear about you. So if folks could, Amy will help us post in this link, but if you could go to menti.com and type in a code 2553673. We want to know where you're coming from today. What kind of, where you're working, the institution that you're at, just to kind of hear a little bit about you. And so I'm actually going to bring this maybe over. Do folks see that? Do folks see the Menti? Okay, so trying this out. Thanks for bearing with me. We've got 7 folks from higher ed, either a librarian or educator. We've got someone from a public library. How awesome. Welcome. Cool, cool. All right. I think that's matching up with who we, and we have another. In the chat, if you're interested in sharing what institution you're with, I don't think that the chat will be part of the recording. And so if you want to share that. So now I'm going to take that away. I'm going to hand it over to Amy.
Yeah, so thanks for telling us a little bit about yourselves. I'm gonna introduce our syllabus, and honestly, how I initially came in contact with this syllabus has been lost to time. I went back into like my old email from early last year, and I cannot figure out how I came into contact with the syllabus. If I had to guess, I would say Twitter. Somebody probably shared it from the Center for Technology and Public Life, and that's probably how I came in contact with it. And then we have a listserv for DEI within our library staff, so folks who are interested in diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, and some of us participate in a community of practice, have a listserv. And so I shared this syllabus and said, hey, does anyone maybe want to think about doing this? And Wanda will talk more about that process of how it came to be later in the presentation. But this is the syllabus that I encountered. Next slide. The creators of this syllabus are all researchers or research fellows at the Center for Information Technology and Public Life at North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And I'm not an expert on their work, but I do admire their work from afar. They do really cool crossover work with different disciplines, like media and communications, as well as politics and the public sphere, information science, which is important to many of us, technology, and policy. And you may have heard the name Tressie McMillan Cotton. She's employed as part of CIDAP, one of their researchers, and is also a professor within their library school there, which I think is called Information Studies and Library Science. Yeah, so they've done some cool work, and I've been following them from afar, and they're the ones that came up with this syllabus. Next slide. All right, so this syllabus is organized in 13 weeks. Wanda will talk more about how we adopted that to a different frequency and or time period. It's very scaffolded in that each section has a blurb of background information, the introducing the topic, the main topic, and the readings. And some sections are like peer-reviewed articles and or like heavy in those types of resources. And then other sections may have audiovisual materials and more primary sources. So it's a real nice mix. They state that their intended audience is graduate students, faculty, researchers, but it could be used for undergraduates as well. That's how they have worded it. And to the best of my knowledge, I don't think that this is being taught in a course, at least not currently. I did some digging to try to see if this syllabus is currently in use. And I think it's more in the spirit of like the purple syllabus and the lemonade syllabus, where there's publicly sharing. It is open, very intentionally open source. And they even say that you could use and repurpose things without attribution. So I thought that was really generous. It's interdisciplinary, but they do say that the majority of the contributors have a communication and media studies background. Next. Okay, so it's, like I said, interdisciplinary. They stayed up front that it's US focused. So there's definitely global international scope as you get further on in the weeks, but it does start from a more US standpoint. The contributors or the creators of the syllabus have some kind of interesting information at the start or in their documentation regarding their own positionality, or maybe that's not even the right word, but what I'm trying to get at is that they refer to things like the fact that the citations they use and knowledge production in general, these things are political acts. So I thought that was an interesting frame of reference. That makes more sense actually, having completed the syllabus or almost completed it. And they foreground in historical context, but it doesn't mean that they're implying that there aren't current social problems and platforms that are problematic, and they're not blameless. So they express that they think that these technology companies, for example, should be held accountable, and they express support for activists who are actively holding these companies accountable. Next slide. Okay, so this syllabus is looking to take a holistic approach to disinformation, and they center around how social stratification and differentiation like race, ethnicity, gender, power shape the dynamics of disinformation. And they have a dedicated commitment to equality and justice, and also are clear that disinformation is a key way in which whiteness in the United States has been reinforced. Next. All right, so handing it back over to Wanda to talk about our implementation.
Okay, unmute Wanda. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we literally did to foster or try to foster peer professional development, and maybe you can do this at your institution as well. So as Amy has mentioned, we did take a 13-week course and moved it into 13 months. And so there was an original planning team. So when Amy made this announcement and was looking for folks to participate and help lead, there was 3 of us that started out as this planning team. And so we would look at the syllabus for that week and kind of think about how to move forward. We would there sometimes could be 3 readings, there could be 7 readings, and we knew that would be a lot to ask of staff. And so we would look ahead, preview all of those articles. Many times we would read them all and then decide which we thought people would interact more with, where could we find more discussion. And so, well, but we would also share all of those readings with folks, so that way they knew that they were available. As we started to move along, let me back up for a second. We were intentional about scheduling on the 3rd Thursday of the month. We wanted all of these on folks' calendars from the very beginning, so that way if folks were interested, they would be able to block that time. And it's really hard, you know, your calendar starts to fill up. You think at the beginning of the semester, oh, this is going to be great. And then it's just day by day, it gets fuller and fuller. And And so if folks could attend, great. We had no expectation of everyone making all of them or even some of them. If you showed up for one, that would be just fine. We're just trying to foster a space to discuss these readings and why these readings with this subject matter and things like that. We would send out email reminders about maybe hopefully 2 weeks before we were to meet. This would give folks, we would then send out the email with the readings that we would discuss. Sometimes we would send discussion questions too, but as we started to move forward, that became a lot to do as well. And so we found that the folks who attended were interested, and we generated enough conversation without discussion questions, but that could be helpful for some groups, especially early on when you're trying to navigate to see how this is going to go with your colleagues. When we first started out having people choose which articles they wanted to read, and we felt that became a little bit difficult to have deep discussions. And so that's when we focused on having a specific reading that we would share out. But then we decided that it would be worthwhile if we would highlight the other readings. And so we created slide decks, and we would kind of summarize what those other articles were about, so people could have not all of the context, but a bit more context to go along with the reading that we selected for that time. And then we repeated for 12 months. It's a 13-month program that we've done, and we are approaching, this week is, we're on our 12th. So we're in the, what's that baseball? We're in the final stretch. It's been a journey for sure. Amy did mention that we have a DEI listserv in the libraries that's internal for folks who want to opt in. And so we advertised that way or marketed that way. We also have something called a Monday memo. It's a weekly staff newsletter that goes out. And so you can advertise things in that. And so this is a screenshot of that advertisement, and just kind of giving folks some outcomes that we hope to get out of this, where we found this, what the plan is. We also started with a sign up to kind of gauge if people would really be interested in this. And so with that sign up, that's how we were able to populate calendars and send out invites, so that way they would be there for the 13 months. All right. And so we are about to share with you some of the syllabus examples. We're going to take a look at week 1, week 2, and week 10. But before we do that, we wanted to hear from you all what you think of, what comes to mind when you hear the word or phrase disinformation. So if you go back to that Menti tab, and we can, and the code again is 2537673. You want to try and copy and paste that in, or when you go to Menti. Bring that over. I'm kind of going between 3 screens, and it's very sensitive. Okay, so folks are hearing when they think of disinformation, fake news, manipulation, propaganda, misleading, and deceit. Yeah, and you know, this isn't, many folks sometimes are thinking that this is newish. And it is not a thing that was just came out of the blue in 2016. Disinformation has been around for a very, very long time. And that's kind of, excuse me, what the literature and the syllabus was getting at as well. So misleading, intentional, info with a hidden bias. Exactly. Thanks for joining in on that. Big lie. Okay. So I'm going to click on the next slide. Turn it back over to Amy.
Yes, I'm back. So each week has a theme, kind of how you'd expect a syllabus to roll out. And it's very intentionally scaffolded with the more introductory topics at the front. This makes sense that the first week we talked about defining or the definitions of disinformation and like terms. It was really important that our reading group got on the same page about these definitions as well. Next slide. All right, so you all did excellent at listing your terms there in Menti, but they in the syllabus at least are defining disinformation as false, misleading information intentionally that is intentionally spread for profit or to create harm or to advance political or ideological goals. And I know, I mean, speaking for myself, I worry sometimes that I'm conflating misinformation and disinformation. Also, like, what the heck is malinformation? So there's all of these different prefixes to go with information, and so it was beneficial for us to get on the same page and to do the readings involved with week one. Misinformation is kind of an umbrella topic for disinformation. Disinformation is a form of misinformation, whereas disinformation is more intentional. Misinformation could be intentional or unintentional. And malinformation is information that may be based on reality, but it's used maliciously to inflict harm and ignite. It could be to ignite hatred in a particular group. So an example of this would actually be revenge porn. Next slide. Okay, so as mentioned, we heard a lot about disinformation, misinformation, fake news, terms like that around the 2016 presidential election. But this syllabus is really forceful in stating this is not a new topic. It may be new to your stance, or may affect you and your demographics at this point, but this has actually been happening. This is not a new phenomenon. This has been happening throughout history. And so focusing on 2006, they're saying ignores a very long history of propaganda and persuasion that's tied to corporations, media, and state interests. The authors of the syllabus also note that disinformation's current form is often rooted in weakening of trust in our democratic institutions. So this could be the press, the judiciary, political parties, media, social media, etc., and the increased influence of extremist, conspiratorial, and fringe communities and thinking. Next. So these two slides are just a snapshot of the readings that we engaged in. And so in the earlier weeks, we were having people self-select what they were going to read, but it was kind of challenging to have discussions. So you could view these citations if you were to open up the syllabus yourself, and I linked to it in the chat. But you could kind of skim over these citations and see that they're very introductory in nature. I think we'll skip ahead to week 2, Wanda. Thank you for driving. Okay. So week 2 was the myth of the epistemically consistent past. And so this was another really important level of scaffolding. It's referring to, can you go to the next slide? I think my notes are better on that one. Thank you. Okay, so it's wrongly, disinformation studies often wrongly assumes that members of the public share a common understanding and the sense of what's true, when instead that's stratified. And the readings in this section really highlight the role of media in maintaining separate racial epistemologies, and I've had to have a lot of practice with that, pronouncing that term, I just must say. It's been a struggle for me to pronounce these terms. And maintaining the separate racial epistemologies and the strategic absence of the concern of the marginalized groups from public agendas. So 3 of the readings were deep dive into how the power, race, and imperialism contribute to legitimatizing knowledge and truth, and making and recording historical information. And just thinking as we go to the citations for this one, Wanda, I think this was the week where we learned a lot about Haiti, if you remember that. Okay, so you can view the citations there. Yeah, the last one here from 1995 has been made into an HBO documentary. It might even be a series. And so if you're going to take something from week 2, that's what I would recommend doing, reading that or visiting the HBO documentary. And then week 10, we'd love to focus on each of the weeks, but it would be not possible in an hour-long section or session. So we're going to jump ahead to a week that we thought was really important. We had a lot of engaging conversations. So week 10, if you go to the next slide. Yes.
Okay, cool. So so a lot happened in from weeks 2 to 10. Week 3 was disinformation in a global context, readings that led us to reflect on what deliberately false information might look like in other contexts. Week 4 was a crime and anti-Black disinformation, where we where topics like the Central Part 5 came up, and Ava DuVernay's movie When They See Us was a part of that topic. Week 6 was a case study on media activism in the AIDS crisis. Those readings explored the silence and stigma that federal and state governments and many legacy media institutions maintained around the plague for years in the United States. Week 9 was disinformation, news, and identity claims, drawing on examples from political campaigns, ads, and mainstream news. So then I just wanted to catch you up quick. So then week 10, we're looking at leveraging inequality in disinformation and fake news. And so one of the articles that we read was this They Rule. And I think what's important about this is that, believe it or not, sometimes librarians aren't always aware of the other things that are nested within the literature and articles. So this was for me, this was a new topic. I think that a lot of times we would find out that we weren't aware of some of these things due to our information bubbles, the people that we surround ourselves with. And so when I first saw this, I was like, what is this? Like they are, like, is all of a sudden, is this going to, so my familiarity with they is pronoun use. And so thinking about like, what is going on here? Then we find out that on 4chan, a website, a social media website, it's common for folks who are using that to other people by putting it inside of quotes. So you'll see in the title here, they is inside, or parentheses is in several parentheses, and that is a way for othering. And I had no clue. It makes sense to me now, of course, like when you're like, oh, that wasn't far, but it just wasn't necessarily on my radar. And we also learned a lot about in and out groups. When leading this discussion, it was we were kind of trying to get at, like, did anybody go look at 4chan? I'm afraid I don't want that in my web browser history. You know, being a librarian, depending on where you are in your career or at what institution, you can have a lot of things that you're looking at. I just didn't want this on my personal browser. I was, but I think that, you know, getting a chance to see all of these, all of this literature and all these resources help put things together that I just wasn't necessarily picking up on my own. Another article that week, Black Trolls Matter, talked a lot about connecting racial asymmetries to ideological ones. And so contemporary disinformation often pivots on racial stereotypes and xenophobia and anti-Semitism, misogyny, and other expressions of structural inequality. And these readings highlighted how racial histories and stereotypes operate within and across communities. And so this was super, you know, and finding out from these articles that sometimes people are impersonating other people, depending on their, the name that they are using, or the little image that they use for themselves. It can be really misleading, and we like to think that we can trust folks that we think are like us. And so there's a lot of like going in, a lot of deceit as with disinformation sometimes. So that was a real quick view of week 10. But we also wanted to share, so it was all fascinating. I think that Amy and I potentially got more out of it maybe than our attendees, because we were previewing, because we were reading more, because we were preparing these slides and this information and getting ready. But we'll show you later on that everyone did get a lot out of it. But areas that we noticed more engagement were the Japanese internment camps section, where the US government strategically leveraged language like evacuation and non-aliens rather than forced removal. And we hear about that still going on. Another one was the crime and anti-Black disinformation. And what was interesting about this, you know, I mentioned the Central Park Five. Ava DuVernay's movie was called When They See Us. She was adamant about not wanting to have the Central Park Five in it because it has this negative connotation, and so she really wanted to have this other side of the story. Welfare Queens, or Welfare Queen, was rooted in racial, class, and gendered stereotypes that were both anti-Black and anti-poor. And it really, and all of that helped in the reduction in policy reform going forward. And then the disinformation, repression, and Black liberation, we found folks interested in that. The readings would explore relationship between the state and anti-communism in the 20th century Black liberation movements. And I say that noticeable engagement. And there were different things that caught our attention like that, like people, the conversation kept going, and sometimes it would last longer than an hour. Also, sometimes later after we met, or days and even a week later, people would share with one another resources that they would come across that, you know, sometimes you're not aware of something until it's introduced to you, and then you see it everywhere. Well, we noticed that that was happening, and more with some areas. But with anything, there are also challenges. And so some of those challenges we just wanted to share out. The listed resources were not always open access. And so we did a lot of work making sure that people had access if we were going to go with something that we didn't have access to. We reached out via ILL and worked with them and made sure to select resources that everyone could access. in that same way, there was streaming subscription. Some, not everyone has Netflix, not everyone has Hulu. And so some of the resources were sometimes films or documentaries. And so we were mindful not to suggest that this could be a good add-on, but that's not what we would focus about. Books were a challenge. We didn't want to ask our colleagues to read an entire book. We're already doing a lot. And so we when there was a book, we kind of were intentional about not selecting it. Attendance is a challenge. There's so many competing groups, different organizations that we're a part of, different communities of practice. And this was another one, right? And so we're already with lack of capacity because of the pandemic and short staff. And this is not necessarily called out in our job descriptions, and it's not rewarded necessarily. But at the same time, we also have a messaging that this is a part of our everyday work. And so there was a lot to do with that. And we just wanted folks to know that it's okay if you can't make them. It's okay if you even didn't read, just come in and join us. November and December are always very difficult for scheduling. And if you remember that we selected the third November of a month. And so we did have to, we combined a couple of weeks or months. 13 months is a long time. I don't know if any of you recall doing anything for 13 months straight besides like going to work. There's very few things that we've kept up with. I guess I'll just speak for myself that so this 13 months is a long time. I don't know how we would have done it though. I think it would have been too much to do the weekly. That it's just a lot. And then the final challenge is that it is a heavy lift for the staff leading the sessions.
Okay, so we, as the planners, felt like we got a lot out of it. Hold on, I'm having trouble going to my next slide. Oh, it's because of all that animation. There we go. So we felt personally like we had gotten a lot out of this journal club and learned quite a bit about disinformation and maybe even crossed some thresholds. But we were coming at it from a facilitator angle where we were reading more. And so we had asked our colleagues preparing for this presentation if they would share more about their experience. We gave them an option to do it anonymously through a form. And so 3 folks shared with us, and some themes that we pulled out of it. We're going to show you some examples here of their testimonials, but in the first one here, we notice a theme of holding space and time in this virtual space to discuss challenging topics and the value that brings. Some attendees really felt like this was a safe space. And I think, yeah, what does safe space even mean? Maybe it's safe for one person and not another. So I think we could go on and on about that, but I appreciated that this person expressed that. Next. The second example here, a theme would be that the syllabus really provided us with a nice structure. I think I would have really struggled to like pull something like this together on my own, and also why create the wheel or duplicate efforts if something like this already does exist. So it was really nice to use the syllabus as a structure for discussing this information. It was already scaffolded for us. And some felt like it was beneficial and even vital to process the information together with colleagues at the same time. And so we were crossing these thresholds together. Next. And some felt like they maybe had a surface level or conversational understanding of disinformation before we started this journal club, but working through it led to a deeper understanding of the topic. And we also benefited from learning from our colleagues and their own lived experiences. We had some folks with vastly different experiences or upbringings or family structures that were able to share information in these conversations that I found to be helpful that wouldn't have happened if it was just me going through these materials on my own. All right, next. I don't think we talked about who had this slide, but it's just a link to the syllabus. We encourage you to explore the syllabus on your own or to think about launching something like a journal club. One to mention we're in week 12 and that meeting is tomorrow. And then we'll have one next month and then that will be the end. Thank you. Any questions for us?
This was so great. Thank you, Amy and Wanda. For folks who are attending, please do use the chat feature. We all know Zoom. We're plenty familiar with Zoom here to share your questions. Here. I've got a couple questions while folks start tapping away, if that is okay. Maybe like the first one that sprung to mind is like the one thing that I just love about this program and project of these, as you've described it, is that it sort of spans time. And you've said that the cohort of attendees has maybe changed and has cycled up and down a little bit. But is there anything that you have noticed about conversations within the group and how or if they have changed over time?
I'll start that one, Amy. So when I've used a syllabus in the past, I'm not sure that I understood that everything was scaffolded. I think I was just trying to get to the end, to do my assignments. And unfortunately, the instructors at the time, not due to anything of theirs, I just wasn't picking up on that this will lead to this, or this will talk, everything was connected. So some things that we learned in week 1 and 2 or week 3 was brought up again in week 7. And so, and people would refer to that. And so that was really, really fantastic that people were retaining it and seeing the connections. And so I think at least within our gatherings, our discussions, people were seeing that. And so I think too that, going for 13 months, like it kind of, we would sometimes joke about, okay, more disinformation or something like that. And so, but I think that the scaffolding and the building off of each topic was really helpful, and people did notice that. And then the fact that they would come back a week later and say, hey, I just saw this. I just wanted to share this with all of you because it's something that we just talked about.
Yeah, and I would add that I think it's in Bloom's taxonomy application, knowledge application. Like there's things happening. Well, I mean, there's propaganda constantly, but definitely current events like the invasion of Ukraine. We would want to like save time in some of those meetings to talk about those things, and people would do a really good job of applying what we had already learned to current events. And so that was kind of a nice way to see that the power or like how effective these learnings had been.
Yeah, cool. I can see that. Yeah. What about, did you have specific goals in mind when you sort of put together the idea for this series and the syllabus? Was it about awareness building, or was there some action you're working toward beyond that?
Do we have that on a slide? We had goals. Okay. I don't have them memorized. Did you pull it up?
So we did have learning outcomes. And so we actually shared that with the folks that we reached out to. I'm like, do you feel like this happened? And so the learning, and I think that the learning outcomes, I'll just read them here if that's okay. Translate concepts and ideas from the guide to our everyday work as information professionals. Understand the difference between misinformation, disinformation, propaganda. malinformation and fake news. And then the final learning hoped outcome was to analyze the history of disinformation and how it has been used by government and media to disenfranchise and uphold systems of white supremacy and socioeconomic hierarchies. And so I think that we're there, getting there. I think it will take a bit of work to move this into our own teaching, but we needed to have that that basic understanding, or a start. We need to start somewhere.
I think our outcomes are actually really well articulated. And I'm like, sometimes you look at something that you wrote previously and you're like, did I really knew those? What? And so, yeah, I think we were very intentional about setting up our learning outcomes from the start. And even I think we're maybe trying to think about buy-in from others, and maybe even admin, like if we had an opportunity to bring in like a guest speaker or something that could speak to these ideas. But I think, speaking for myself, like the syllabus is so well constructed that I don't even know if we need to bring in one of the speakers, although I think like give people money and make sure we respect our other people's expertise. But the syllabus is constructed in a way that it's like really easy to pick up, in my opinion. And then I also want to say +1 to what Wanda mentioned about not realizing that syllabi are scaffolded. I'm a first-gen college, and I think that's a big part of like why I didn't really pick that up as an undergrad, or maybe even grad. I'm not sure, grad student. Yeah. So it's been more like, it's kind of had me thinking about syllabi and like the purpose and curriculums in general and how they build on each other in ways that I hadn't given myself time to think through.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing your adaptation and your implementation of this syllabus. I can absolutely see how it's sort of ground for replicability. It could be replicated in different contexts and different scenarios, and it also just seems like a wonderful reading list source for sort of identifying different aspects of disinformation and digging deeper into kind of specific topics under that umbrella, that sub-umbrella. So thank you very much. Thanks for joining. Thanks for sharing your experience and your project. For attendees, thanks everyone for engaging today in this topic. Again, this is the last in our Media Landscape series. So if you've attended other sessions, thank you very much for taking part in those. I would encourage you to visit the Level Up website, where you can find other past sessions, as well as the interactive 23 things where you can really dig deeper. And I think those just provide such an opportunity for engaging with colleagues and for furthering some of this work. Conversations are ongoing about how to continue the Media Landscape's work in other ways as well. So if you are interested in taking part in that planning or consideration, please do reach out to us at Minitex. Would be a place to start. Thanks so much, Wanda. Thanks so much, Amy. Wonderful session. And thanks to everyone else for attending.